Alrighty then, tonight's show is going to be interesting. I wish I had a big blackboard like Glenn Beck, or I knew how to use Trello board so I could give you some visuals, because tonight we're going to be doing a Glenn Beck type show. Okay, I've made some connections, haven't seen anybody else make these connections before, but it's a perfect example of what we mean when we talk about deep state. I said to my then girlfriend at George Bush's inauguration in January of 1989, in the end it doesn't matter because the president doesn't run the country. And she looked at me and she said, "What do you mean? Of course he runs the country. He's the most powerful man in the world." And I said, "No." I said, "The people that run the country are in all of these three-story limestone buildings here. They're all in the various departments. They're the lifelong bureaucrats that stay there as presidents come and go. The longest we can have a presidential administration is 8 years. Bureaucrats, the first thing they do is they sit down, they have their photograph taken for their ID card, and then they get their arse measured so that it can be set in concrete for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And they're unionized and they retire with pension. And then over on top of that, we've got the SES, the Senior Executive Service, started by Jimmy Carter, that Obama abused so completely. So you'll have an administration, you'll have a president like Donald John Trump, who literally within seconds of taking the oath of office has people that work for him actively opposing his administration, actively working to undermine his presidency from within our own government. Okay, that's the rot, that's the corruption we're talking about. That's why we're so concerned about what IG Horowitz is going to show with the Pfizer report. That's why we want criminal indictments from Attorney General Barr. We've just found out more emails have been turned over by DOJ to the State Department to see whether the State Department had already provided them. Hillary said there were 33,000 pages of yoga and Chelsea wedding emails that she didn't turn over. Already they found 77,000 pages of emails, much of them transmitting absolutely confidentially marked emails. Absolutely. Emails that were marked confidential, that she had taken the confidential markings off. Absolutely. Emails that disclosed the identity of an undercover CIA operative working overseas. Okay, remember all those CIA operatives that were killed in China? Again, they used the Clinton Foundation as a slush fund. We've got an article today. It looks like they were using Ukraine to funnel IMF money and International Monetary Fund money. And if you don't know, there's two international funding organizations. There's the World Bank, which is traditionally headed, and this is a tacit agreement, this isn't formal, but this is the gentleman's agreement. The World Bank is always headed by an American, and the IMF is always headed by somebody from Europe. Well, what's this whole Europe-America connection? It started off benignly. It started off as a good thing. The philosophy is called Atlanticism. And the idea is that the United States, and to a lesser extent Canada, need to be engaged in the affairs of Europe to prevent another World War I, another World War II. Okay, what Bretton Woods, the conference at Bretton Woods, and all of these transatlantic organizations, the NATO treaty, they were all designed to knit together in an economic structure the United States and Canada with the Western European countries. Again, this was all done in the context of World War II and then in the context of the Cold War. But as with anything man-made, evil people are going to find a way to twist and pervert it toward their own ends. Their own ends primarily being their own profit. Okay, Profit, not Phet. So we're going to look tonight, and this is the article that tipped me off. Second Adam Schiff staffer linked to Burisma-backed think tank quote, close friends, end quote, with alleged whistleblower. I scroll down to continue, and it says, yet another staffer for Representative Adam Schiff, Shifty Schiff, had Schiff for brain Schiff, served as a fellow for the Arachnid Council, a think tank that is funded and works in partnership with Burisma, the natural gas company at the center of allegations regarding Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden. Sean Misko, M-I-S-K-O, and I'm going to put links to all of these articles that we're going to talk about in the description. So I don't have a big Becky and blackboard, but pretend I'm up there with a blackboard like Beck, and putting all the pictures up and drawing all the connections between these people. But I will put the links to the articles in the description. Sean Misko has been described as quote-unquote close friends with who? Oh, with Eric Ciaramella, whom Real Clear investigation suggests is the likely so-called whistleblower, even though he's not a whistleblower under the law. Misko reportedly joined Schiff's staff at the House Intelligence Committee. When? In August? The same month the so-called whistleblower's complaint was filed after first reportedly interfacing with a staffer for Schiff's office? Ciaramella interfaces with a staffer in Schiff's office, and Misko just happened to join Schiff's staff in August, and they just happened to be friends? Oh, Shifty Schiff, say it ain't so. Misko in 2015 was a year-long quote-unquote Millennium Fellow at the Burisma-funded Arachnid Council, which has been under the microscope for its ties to other individuals associated with the Trump impeachment inquiry. Now, I used to joke, I lived in New York City, and I would see someone I knew, at least I would meet them randomly on the street, in the subway, shopping, someplace, out at a restaurant. I would meet someone I knew randomly at least once a week, but usually it was like 2, 3, 4 times a week. You just run into people you know. And I would joke that if you went to a small liberal arts college or an Ivy League school in the Northeast, you know everybody in the Northeast. Because it's true. 6 degrees of separation. I mean, I was 2 degrees away from President Nixon on 2 different pathways. Okay, my cousin was married to the guy who was Nixon's researcher. I had another friend whose husband was his White House counsel. So it is a big club, and it really matters where you went to school. I mean, I went to a little-known liberal arts college here in upstate New York, and my classmate was Abby Johnson, who's the wealthiest woman in America, the head of Fidelity Investments now. Warren Littlefield, who greenlit Seinfeld for NBC and went on to become head of NBC Entertainment, he's an alumnus of my college. The guy that created Crazy Glue, which in an ironic twist of fate was developed for field suturing. Crazy Glue was not developed as an adhesive per se. It was developed for surgical wound dressing in the field. So if a guy was shot up, you'd squirt him with the super glue, and that would bind all of his blood. That would stanch the bleeding until they could get him to a MASH unit and hopefully save his life. And Crazy Glue, super glue, actually did end up saving a lot of soldiers' lives in the Korean War. He was an alumnus of my college. So even this little out-of-the-way upstate New York liberal arts college has a lot of connections to a lot of people who are really important. And we're talking United States Congressman Rod Frelinghuysen and a whole lot of people, right? So and this is just a little-known school. If you go to one of the better-known schools, the Williamses, the Amhersts, the Bowdens, the Middleburys, any of the Ivies, take that to the next level, okay? Because the Ivy League is where all the heavy hitters go to school. You have to have the Ivy degree in there somewhere. And quite frankly, Cornell is okay, Penn is okay, it counts, but it doesn't count as much as Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. And then to a lesser extent, Dartmouth. But Brown is okay, but the big 3 are Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. If you want to be a player on the international scene, you've got to go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, or to Stanford, or similar colleges. University of Michigan is another one. There are certain big name schools that are big name schools for a reason, because big name people go there. And through alumni networks and through, I've always counseled young people, the most important thing that you will gain from a college education are the relationships you make with your professors and with your classmates. Most of CIA people come on, the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University is literally a training ground for CIA. Okay, so when you have all of these school ties, social ties that become family ties because you marry a classmate and your whole family's network merges with their whole family's network, you end up with a situation like we have in California where 4 families, the Browns, the Pelosi's, the Newsoms, and the Gettys, have basically run California for decades among those 4 families. First Pat Brown and then Jerry Brown, the Pelosi's, Gavin Newsom is Nancy Pelosi's nephew. Gavin Newsom, wasn't he married to Kimberly Guilfoyle? Kimberly's a sharp girl. She's a lawyer in her own right. I'll bet you she learned an awful lot when she was married to Gavin Newsom. I wonder if any of that information is passed to Don Jr. It was part of Pillow Talk. I'd love to see these people brought down because they have taken the great state of California and they've absolutely trashed it, and they've trashed it for their own purposes. And then, of course, the Gettys. The J. Paul Getty Art Museum, all that Getty oil money is in there as well. So Atlantic Council is one of these transatlantic organizations, and again, not evil in and of itself, but evil for the purposes to which it has been put. Now, he was a 2015 Millennium Fellow. Before we get to his bio, I'm going to look at the board of directors of the Atlantic Council. Now, I know a lot of people from a lot of things. I was asked to join the Council of Foreign Relations, and I demurred because I did not want to be part of that organization. But I know a lot of people, and I'm not going to list everybody I know, but who's the chairman? John F.W. Rogers. John Rogers is from Seneca Falls, which is just west of here. And then we have, who was the former chairman? Why, that would be former U.S. Senator John Huntsman. So now you know why Abby Huntsman was such a twat to Don Jr. on The View. Let's look at some of these other names. Chairman Emeritus Brent Scowcroft. There's a name we know. How about C. Boyden Gray? There's a name we know from the Bush 1 administration. C. Boyden Gray was George Bush's White House counsel. The directors. We've got R. Nicholas Burns. He's a guy from my town in Massachusetts who was a U.S. ambassador. Scrolling down because there's a whole lot of people on here. And I wanted to list off another couple names. Well, there's Henry Kissinger, of course. Henry has to be part of every transnational organization. There's H.R. McMaster. How about that? How about Susan Molinari, former Republican Congresswoman from Staten Island? See, this isn't a Republican versus Democrat thing. This is a globalist versus patriot thing. Okay. Who else do we have? Anybody? David Petraeus. How about that? There's a name we know. Tom Ridge, former 43 Secretary of Homeland Security. How about that? What do you know? What do you know? Who else was down in here? Have I seen any other names? Dov Zakheim. How about that? Honorary directors, James A. Baker III. Secretary of State under Reagan and Bush. How about Ashton Carter? Ash Carter was big in the Clinton administration. Bob Gates, former head of CIA. Michael Mullen, Admiral Mullen. Leon Panetta. Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. Remember, I said they're Republicans, but they're not conservatives. These are establishment people. John Warner. Bill Webster, former head of the FBI and CIA. Lifetime directors. See if we recognize any names on here. These are all pretty obscure people, but they're not obscure people within this world. Okay? I'm not seeing any names on the life directors. Tom Pickering's one I recognize. William H. Taft, William Howard Taft IV, the great-grandson of President Taft, former Supreme Court Chief Justice Taft. R. James Woolsey, we know Jim Woolsey. Okay, so see what I mean? It's not a Republican versus a Democrat thing. And let's read what they say about themselves. We won't make any allegations. We will read it right from their own description. Founded by the architects of the initial Atlantic framework from which the current rules-based order originated. The Atlantic Council is the keeper of their enduring vision. Remember, they wanted to inextricably tie the United States economically with Europe to prevent another world war. Noble goal. Marshall Plan came out of Atlanticism. NATO came out of Atlanticism. Okay, Atlanticism in and of itself is not an evil political philosophy. The motivation behind tying Europe and America and eventually China and the whole globe together economically, the idea was that if we're all economically interdependent, then we're less likely to engage in war with each other because it's going to hurt us in the pocketbook. Reasonable, it's kept the peace. We've only had small regional wars since then. There have been no more global wars, so it worked. However, it's worked a lot better for the people on the inside that got to make the rules because they're the ones that got rich. Nancy Pelosi is the sixth wealthiest person in Congress. She's the daughter of a former congressman and mayor of Baltimore. D'Alessandro was her family name, and she married into the Pelosi family, who was one of the big four families that run California. California had the 1960 Winter Olympics at Squaw Valley. Oh, guess who had the concession to set up Squaw Valley as a ski resort and run all of its concessions? Yeah, that would be the Pelosi family. Oh, and what did Gavin Newsom do when he was 24 years old? With a couple pals of his named Getty and another pal named Brown, he started a vineyard and a restaurant chain whose first location was at Squaw Valley. You see how this is all working? These people are using existing structures, existing events to enrich themselves. So the Atlantic Council is the keeper of their enduring vision to prevent world war by tying us together economically. In that role, the Council acts as a central agent in ensuring the prosperity and security of the free world and continues to steward a global community of influencers committed to its preservation and values. Committed to what's preservation and values? Committed to the security and prosperity of the free world. Well, how are the influencers going to just nobly and, out of the goodness of their heart, ensure the prosperity and security of the free world? It's only natural that they take a cut, right? I mean, come on, fair is fair. Why would somebody do this just out of the philanthropic goodness of their own heart? The council is the intellectual home, convener of choice, meaning it's where all these people gather, and thought leadership hub. We're going to teach you how to think. We're going to get together and think what we want people to think, and then we're going to tell you that that's what you have to think. Thought leadership hub for established, why do we think we call it the establishment? Foreign policy and international security leaders committed to advancing this cause through constructive international leadership by the United States and its allies around the world. Well, what did Alinsky say? A true radical cuts his hair, puts on a suit, and what? Infiltrates the establishment. Okay, now let's go back to our article on Shawnee Boy Misko. Misko in 2015 was a year-long Millennium Fellow at the Burisma-funded Atlantic Council. So let's go look at his Millennium Fellow biography. 2015 Millennium Fellow biographies, you got to scroll way down because we got people that run incubators and people that run different programs. These are all noble programs. These are all financial ways to fund people, clean energy BS, social justice BS. We even have a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy, Lieutenant Commander Jeffrey McLean, who was a Navy test pilot, FA-18 carrier pilot. He's a test pilot with the X-47B, and all you pilot and military people know that an X plane is an experimental plane. It's the UAV that can take off and land from carriers. It's a carrier-based UAV, and he's the first one to land a UAV on a carrier. He was graduated with honors and distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy and earned a Master of Arts from Oxford, where he studied as both a Truman Scholar and a Fulbright Scholar. Fulbright scholarships are another way that people get into this world. Who else was a Fulbright Scholar or a Rhodes Scholar? Oh yeah, Bill Clinton studied at Oxford under a Rhodes Scholarship. And he's currently pursuing his MBA at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. You know who has a Bachelor of Science from the University of Pennsylvania? The Wharton School? Yeah, that would be President Trump. So, again, he's been in and around this literally his entire life from his school days. But, by his own choice, he's not a member of the club. He's the guy at all the parties that wasn't drinking, but that was taking mental notes. Now we come to Mr. Sean A. Misko, Director of Persian Gulf for the National Security Council at the White House. Sean is Director for the Persian Gulf on the National Security Council. Remember, I said Parliament and Ukraine and the Ukraine guy. It says all the United States Parliament on Ukraine. Yeah, no, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, that would be the president. Well, Sean Misko clearly thought that he was the one that set policy for the Persian Gulf. Recently, he was a member of the State Department's policy planning staff. In addition to advising Secretary of State John Kerry on South Asia and the Middle East, he led the staff's work on several topics, including the Obama administration's 2015 national security strategy, U.S. efforts to upgrade the international order. What efforts did the U.S. make to upgrade the international order? We're going to get to that. An initiative to enhance U.S. diplomatic leverage. Diplomatic leverage! That sounds dangerously close to a quid pro quo to me. From 2009 to 2012, Sean served as special advisor to the Special Representative of Afghanistan and Pakistan, where he coordinated negotiation of the United States-Afghanistan Strategic Partnership Agreement and was involved in efforts to facilitate a settlement of the Afghanistan conflict. Prior to joining Ambassador Richard Holbrooke's team, Sean worked as a policy advisor to U.S. Central Command, co-authoring an assessment of the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Sean began his government career as a Roberts Intelligence Fellow and political analyst at the CIA. As a presidential management fellow at the State Department's Office of Iranian Affairs, he shaped U.S. policy on Iran's nuclear program and regional activities. He also served as special assistant in the Office of Management and Budget's National Security Division. So you see, he's been with CIA, he's been with State Department, he's been with OMB, and he's been with the White House. These are the people that think that they run the government. They don't think the president, who's a Johnny-come-lately, runs the government. These people know better because they've been doing this professionally for a lot longer, and they go to conferences and they've made contacts and they know people and they've been involved in deals that enrich themselves and their families. So we need to put them in charge. They're not elected, they're not accountable, but they're the ones that know best. Sean holds an MPP in International Security and Political Economy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, as well as BA degrees in International Politics and Media Studies from Penn State University. See, he's an outlier, but he got the Ivy in there with the Kennedy School at Harvard. A term member of the Council on Foreign Relations, he was named a 2011 Manfred Werner Fellow by the German Marshall Fund and recognized as a 2014 Next Generation National Security Leader by the Center for a New American Security. So you can see Sean actually has some real international relations chops. He's done a lot of great things. He's gotten a lot of great scholarships. He's gotten all the right degrees. He knows all the right people. Again, he's one of the people that these people think run the government. Okay, Misko's former position marks the second Schiff staffer who worked or currently works with the Atlantic Council. Wait, you mean there was another one? Thomas Eager, a staffer on Schiff's House Intelligence Committee, is currently a fellow at the Atlantic Council's what? Eurasia Congressional Fellowship, a bipartisan program that says it, quote, educates congressional staff on current events in the Eurasia region. So if you're congressional staff, you're going to get taught about current events in the Eurasia region by who? By Thomas Eager, who was a staffer for who? Shifty Schiff for Brain Schiff. Burisma, in January 2017, signed a quote-unquote cooperative agreement with the council to specifically sponsor the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, where Eager serves as a fellow. So Burisma sets up this Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council and funds the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council, and the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council just happens to hire Shifty Schiff's former staffer. You see how this is all working? The Clintons aren't the only ones, and the Bidens aren't the only ones with Ukraine problems. As Breitbart News reported, itinerary for a trip to Ukraine in August organized by the Atlantic Council reveals that Eager held a meeting during the trip with acting U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Bill Taylor, who we saw in the impeachment Schiff show. Breitbart News reported that Taylor himself has evidenced a close relationship with the Atlantic Council think tank, writing Ukrainian policy pieces with the organization's director and analysis articles published by the council. Eager's August trip to Ukraine was billed as a bipartisan Ukraine study trip. Remember, that's the trip that Nancy was on, in which 10 congressional staffers participated. A closer look at the itinerary for the August 24 to August 31 trip shows that the delegation's first meeting upon arrival in Ukraine was with acting Ambassador Bill Taylor, who had so much problems, who was so very troubled. I have grave concerns about the conversation, about the president threatening, bribing President Zelensky. This is all after the phone call, this trip. Spokespeople for Schiff. So what the trip was basically about was, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to try to bring down Trump. Spokespeople for Schiff's office did not reply to multiple Bright News requests for comment about Eager's meeting with Taylor. You don't say. My favorite is when Terrence K. Williams goes into Pelosi's office, and one time he brings like a little Pinocchio doll and he leaves it there as a gift, and every time he goes into their office, they're sitting there and they're like, oh, not this jerk again, with these fake smiles pasted on their faces. And Terrence is like, oh yeah, I just came in, I'm looking for the whistleblower. The whistleblower under this chair? Where's the whistleblower at? Is he over that counter? Is he in the corner there? Where's the whistleblower at? Terrence is hysterical. So glad he's back from this horrific car accident. The dates of the pre-planned trip are instructive. Eager's visit to Ukraine, sponsored by Burisma-funded Atlantic Council, began 12 days after the so-called whistleblower officially filed his August 12 complaint. Schiff and his office have offered seemingly conflicting statements on the timeline of the contact between the so-called whistleblower and Shifty Schiff's office. Speaking on September 17, Shifty Schiff told MSNBC, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to." Was he using the royal we? Did he personally not speak with Eric Ciaramella? His office certainly did. So what kind of we was he using there? And this little piggy tells lies all day long. Wee. Schiff's spokesperson, Patrick Boland, was quoted on October 2nd saying, "At no point did the committee review or receive the complaint in advance. I call bullshit." Boland said Schiff's committee received the complaint the night before it publicly released the document. That's when it might have received the document that it wrote, that it sent down, that came back. On October 2nd, however, the New York Times reported that Schiff received some of the contents of the complaint through an unnamed House Intelligence Committee aide initially contacted by the so-called whistleblower described as a CIA officer, who we all know as Eric Ciaramella. Times reported the aide shared some of what the officer conveyed to Mr. Schiff. The referenced officer refers to the so-called whistleblower. The newspaper also reported by the time the whistleblower filed his complaint, Mr. Schiff and his staff knew at least vaguely what it contained. Of course they did. They wrote it. Schiff conceded that he was not clear enough about his contact with the so-called whistleblower. I should have been much more clear. When I said that we have not spoken directly with the whistleblower we would like to, I didn't mean that we have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. What I meant was we did not speak directly to the whistleblower, but not that we didn't speak directly to the whistleblower. These people think we're stupid. Now, what's the connection between Misko and Ciaramella? Besides serving as a fellow at the Atlantic Council in 2015, Misko is also listed as providing a small donation up to $999 to the think tank in 2016. Other major donors that year include regular Atlantic Council donors Burisma, Google, and billionaire activist George Soros' Open Society Network. Oh! Hey, I wonder who the biggest funders were last year. Well, what do you know? Fascist book. How about that? Another donor that year was Perkins Coie, the law firm that represented the Democrat National Committee in Hillary Clinton's campaign and also reportedly helped drafted the Google tried CrowdStrike firm to aid with the DNC's allegedly hacked server. Google's parent company Alphabet led a funding drive to provide seed capital to CrowdStrike. On behalf of the DNC and Clinton's campaign, Perkins Coie also paid the controversial what firm? Oh, Fusion GPS firm, to produce the infamous, largely discredited anti-Trump dossier compiled by former British spy Christopher Steele. Prior to working for Schiff, Misko was director for the Gulf states of the National Security Council from 2015 until mid-2018. Before that, Misko worked in the Obama-era State Department under Hillary Clinton's Deputy Chief of Staff, Jake Sullivan. Washington Examiner previously described Misko as evidencing a bro-like friendship with alleged whistleblower Ciaramella, calling the duo close friends. The newspaper reported the two had similarly antagonistic attitudes toward the Trump administration and were witnessed by a former National Security Council official, like Ciaramella, a non-political appointee, to frequently be around one another. Could it be more than a bro relationship? My understanding was that they were friendly with one another. Friendly. Said the NSC official who was described as senior to Ciaramella. They would walk around the halls, get lunch together, stuff like that. He described them as very much cut from the same cloth. With Bambi eyes. Allegedly. And their friendship is bro-like. Would that be Spartan bro-like? If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google the Spartans. The former official described Ciaramella as very hostile toward him when they first met and asked the CIA officer about the type of competitive strategies he'd put in place to compete with the Russians. And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? We don't do that stuff here. We don't take on our adversaries here. We invite think tanks to talk about issues. According to the former official, Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who was fired by Trump after 24 days, wanted to actually take the fight to our enemies and have real strategies. And it was such a contrast because whatever the hell the Obama National Security Council were doing, they were not taking on our adversaries. He said there was this weird cultural hostility to me asking him, are you guys doing your job here? He had a lot of arrogance about him, adding that Ciaramella behaved like he had a protection at the NSC so he could be insubordinate to a more senior official. Imagine that. Real Clear Investigations report by investigative journalist and author Paul Sperry named Ciaramella as best fitting the description of the so-called whistleblower. Officials with direct knowledge of the proceedings say Ciaramella's name has been raised in private in impeachment depositions and during at least one House open hearing that was not part of the formal impeachment proceedings. Federal documents show Ciaramella also worked closely with Joe Biden and worked under Susan Rice, who was also where? She left the Atlantic Council to go to work for the Obama administration. President Obama's national security advisor. He also worked with former CIA Director John Brennan. How come we haven't heard much from Crow Brennan, man? I want his smug, smarmy arse under the prison. Seriously, I want his to be the first indictment. Anti-Trump advocate who has faced controversy for his role in fueling the questionable Russia collusion investigation. Rice participated in Russia collusion meetings and reportedly unmasked senior members of Trump's presidential campaign. She also went on the talk shows Sunday after Benghazi and said it was because of a video. Susan Rice, very bad. And again, where was Susan Rice before she joined the Obama administration as National Security Advisor? Oh yeah, she was with the Arachnid Council. Sperry cites former White House officials saying Charmella worked for Biden on Ukrainian policy issues in 2015-2016, encompassing the time period for which Biden has been facing possible conflict questions for leading Ukraine policy in light of Hunter Biden's work for Burisma. Mark Zaid and Andrew Babkaj, the activist attorneys representing the so-called whistleblower Eric Charmella, refused to confirm or deny that their secret client is indeed Eric Charmella. We neither confirm nor deny the identity of Eric Charmella is the intelligence community whistleblower, the lawyers told Washington Examiner in response to an inquiry about Eric Charmella. Zaid and Bakaj added, our client, Eric Charmella, is legally entitled to anonymity. No, he is not. That's a lie. It's a direct lie. That's a shifty Schiff lie. That's a three Pinocchio lie, according to Washington Post, by the way. Washington Post saying that the whistleblower has a legal right to anonymity is a three Pinocchio lie. Disclosure of the name Eric Charmella of any person who may be suspected to be the whistleblower Eric Charmella places that individual, Eric Charmella, and his family in great physical danger. Any physical harm Eric Charmella and or his family suffers as a result of disclosure of the name Eric Charmella means that Eric Charmella and publications reporting such names will be personally liable for that. Individuals in publications reporting the name Eric Charmella will be personally liable for that harm. Bring it. Please sue me. Eric Charmella, Eric Charmella, Eric Charmella, Eric Charmella, Eric Charmella, Eric Charmella, Eric Charmella. Such behavior is at the pinnacle of irresponsibility and intentionally reckless. Eric Charmella. Soros funding and whistleblower complaint. Besides Burisma funding, the Arachnid Council is also financed by George Soros' Open Society Foundations, Google, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Don't even get me started. The Rockefellers is a whole show unto themselves. You know, of course, Nelson was governor of New York here, and he was vice president under Ford, and he ran for president. And his brother David was head of one of the world's biggest banks, Chase Manhattan. David Rockefeller literally had a Rolodex that was in a cabinet that was 3 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep and contained, the cards weren't just one level. It was on a rotating thing. It was like literally tens of thousands of different business cards and contacts that David Rockefeller had as chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank. And they basically funded everything that went on in Latin America. And who else besides Soros' Open Society, Burisma, Google, I told you, a fascist book, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Who else? The U.S. State Department. Google, Soros' Open Foundations, the Rockefeller Fund, and an agency of the State Department each also finance a self-described investigative journalism organization repeatedly referenced as a source of information in the so-called whistleblower's complaint, alleging Trump was, quote, using the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 presidential race. No, that is not what happened, and I still don't understand why the Republicans haven't hammered it home. All he was doing was asking for their cooperation in criminal investigations under the treaty signed by Bill Clinton and voted aye by then-Senator Joe Biden. The charges in the July 22nd report, this is the whistleblower's complaint, referenced in the so-called whistleblower's document and released by the Google and Soros-funded organization and the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, seem to be the public precursors for a lot of the so-called whistleblowers' own claims. Imagine that. All of their allegations somehow magically, mysteriously made it into the whistleblower's complaint? One key section of the so-called whistleblower's document claims that, quote, multiple U.S. officials told me that Mr. Giuliani had reportedly privately reached out to a variety of other Zelensky advisors, including Chief of Staff Andrei Boyhan and Acting Chairman of the Security Service of Ukraine, Ivan Bakanov. This was allegedly follow-up on Trump's call with Zelensky in order to discuss the cases mentioned in that call, according to the so-called whistleblower's narrative. The complainer was clearly referencing Trump's request for Ukraine to investigate the Biden corruption allegations, as well as CrowdStrike. Even though the statement was written in first person, multiple U.S. officials told me, it contains a footnote referencing a report by Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. How about that? That footnote reads, in a report published by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project on 22nd July, 2 associates of Mr. Giuliani reportedly traveled to Kyiv in May 2019 and met with Mr. Bakanov and another close Zelensky advisor, Mr. Serhiy Sheffer. The so-called whistleblower's account goes on to rely on that same OCC report on 3 more occasions. It does so, too, write that Ukraine's Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko also stated he wished to communicate directly with General Barr on these matters. Document that Trump advisor Rudy Giuliani had spoken in late 2018 to former Prosecutor General Shokin, a Skype call arranged by 2 associates of Mr. Giuliani, and to bolster the charge that I also learned from a U.S. official that associates of Mr. Giuliani were trying to make contact with the incoming Zelensky team. As if there's anything wrong with that. So-called whistleblower then relates in another footnote, I do not know whether these associates of Mr. Giuliani were the same individuals named in the 22nd July report by OCCRP referenced above. So it's okay for them to have all of these international connections and relationships, but how dare the Trump administration try to meet people and make friendships and find out all of our crimes? How dare they? How dare you? The OCCRP report repeatedly referenced is actually a joint investigation by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project and BuzzFeed News. That did what? Oh yeah, that published the Steele dossier. BuzzFeed infamously, BuzzFeed News based on interviews and court business records in the United States and Ukraine. BuzzFeed infamously also first published the full anti-Trump dossier alleging unsubstantiated collusion between the Trump's presidential campaign and Russia. The dossier was paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democrat National Committee. It was produced by Fusion GPS opposition dirt outfit that was hired by Arachnid Council. The OCCRP and BuzzFeed joint investigation result in both OCCRP and BuzzFeed publishing similar lengthy pieces on July 22nd, claiming that Giuliani was attempting to use connections to have Ukraine investigate Trump political rivals. Mockingbird Media talking points for 22nd July. So-called whistleblower document, however, only mentions the largely unknown OCCRP and does not reference BuzzFeed, which has faced scrutiny over its reporting on the Russia collusion claims. So are you seeing all these connections? And everything comes back to Atlantic Council. All the people come back to Atlantic Council. All the funding comes back to Atlantic Council. These are all the same people. I'm reminded of the great comedian George Carlin when he says, it's a big effing club and you're not in it. No, we are not. Neither is Donald John Trump. Great analogy I saw this week. Let's say you had a bank and everybody at the bank was stealing. Everybody at the bank was embezzling. Everybody from the president on down to the tellers were embezzling from the bank. And everybody knew everybody was embezzling, and so nobody reported any embezzling. And then a new bank president comes in. How happy do you think all those existing employees are going to be with the new bank president trying to shut down the embezzlement and criminally prosecute the embezzlers? Okay? I said it in January of 2016. I said it in 2017. I said it in December of 2016. I said it on the day after the election. Day after the election, I said the first thing that President Trump needs to do immediately after taking the oath of office. And remember, I said it. If you've been listening to me long enough, you know. I said I want him to take the oath of office. I want him to step to the side and sign his first executive order, which would be to fire every single Obama appointee. And then go to the lectern and deliver the State of the Union address and announce to the world what he had just signed. So that his very first action in office needs to be to sign an executive order firing all U.S. attorneys, all ambassadors, all political appointees, everybody that was in the Obama administration that he can fire, because remember, Obama loaded up the SES and you're going to have to get those people out with dynamite. He needed to fire them. After he took the oath of office, as soon as he had the mantle of authority to sign, he needed to sign that and then step. And I said at the time, how dramatic would that be? How wonderful would that be? He didn't do that. And for the last 3 years, almost, he has paid the price. We wouldn't have had the Mueller investigation. We wouldn't have had all of this impeachment BS. We wouldn't have had any of this if he had just fired all of the Obama nods. All right, that's all I've got for you tonight. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found it interesting. Tried to make it fun. I know it's a lot to process when you can't see it. I'm a visual learner. I would have loved, believe me, I would have loved to have been up at a blackboard and say, yeah, and it ties to here, and this star ties to him, and to him, and to him. But I don't have that capability yet. Maybe down the road I will. I hope you found it entertaining. Hope you found it informative. I will post the links to the documents and the articles in the description. Until next time, have a very happy Thanksgiving. We all have a tremendous amount for which to be thankful. God bless you. God bless these United States. Keep fighting the good fight.